A day without bread is like a day without sun.
Bread, an elemental creation of earth, air, water, fire. Grain, yeast, water, and heat do indeed give us this day our daily bread. The Culinary Institute of America, with the Bread Bakers Guild of America, presents Bread and Baker from the Source. Program 1, Traditions of French Bread Baking. With thousands of years of history afforded to our species to bake, taste, and experiment, a few cultures have elevated bread making to a high art. Certainly the French are among them. One of the chief students of bread is also one of its foremost teachers. His name is Professor Raymond Calvel, master baker and much honored educator far beyond the bounds of his native France.
It is the respect of the natural ingredients that has led me to spend all these years on bread making in France. I have dedicated myself to quality French breads.
His love of bread has endured since his early years in the south of France, where he began his career as a bake shop apprentice. He trained in Toulouse and Paris, winning top honors in his class. In 1936, at the age of 23, he was asked to become a professor of baking at l'École Française de Meunerie. He has always been a missionary in the service of bread, traveling to Asia, 25 times to Japan alone, in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and North and South America. On one such trip, he visited the campus of the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, to share his wisdom about the science and art of bread making with the students and faculty there. With the assistance of his colleague, Hatsuo Takuchi, he demonstrated his time-proven techniques for each step of bread making, from preparing ingredients to mixing, fermentation, dividing, molding, proofing, scoring the shapes for baking, and evaluating the final product. And with his characteristic joie de vivre, he shared the bread of his labor with those fortunate enough to be in his constellation. It became apparent that once the professor's basic methods are learned, they can be applied to many types of breads. In our series, we will examine the principles and techniques of baking traditional French bread as set forth by Professor Calvel in his teachings and his books, especially the most recent, Le Goût de Pain, or The Taste of Bread. The first program will explore the general principles and main elements that comprise a good French bread. Ingredients, mixing, fermentation, division and molding, baking. The second program will detail the making of the most famous French bread, the long, thin, crusty baguette, and also pain de campagne, the coarse country bread which preceded the baguette. Program 3 will analyze the making of 3 more unusual specialty breads, as demonstrated by the professor. Pain au levain, the traditional distinctive tasting sourdough bread. Pain de seigle, traditional rye bread. And pain de mie, or pan bread, ideal for sandwiches. But first, in Program 1, a broad look at the principles of French bread baking. What is French bread? The term describes a number of breads from various regions of France developed over time. Today, laws exist which specify the ingredients, size, weight, and until recently, even the price of many varieties of French bread. Outside of France, the term often describes breads made by following the methods of French bakers. But even in France, not all breads meet the professor's high standards.
Pain traditionnel qui respecte le mieux ce qu'a été le pain de la Bible.
Good traditional bread is bread that reflects the original characteristics of the flour and other ingredients. It is the bread of the Bible. It is flour, water, some kind of yeasted culture, and salt. Today we use salt. In biblical times they didn't. It is a product that is very poor in ingredients, but if we start with a good flour and respect the baking process, we end up with excellent results. The correct baking procedure starts with a good long first fermentation time. This long fermentation should be followed by division that is not too brutal, that does not abuse the dough. The molding process should be gentle enough not to overly degas the dough piece. And finally, a good and careful bake in the oven. The bread should have an attractive exterior appearance, should be well risen, and it should not be too light or too dense. The color of the crust should be golden yellow with a very light orange tint. When we examine the interior of the bread, it should be scattered with irregular holes, and the crumb color should be very creamy beige. It should have a very good aroma, and when one eats it, it should have a good mâche, or a good chew quality. And finally, a good bread should have good keeping qualities. The baker has to be conscientious in offering a good loaf of bread. If the bread that the bakery makes is good, the consumer will appreciate it.